Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be enchanted by the radiance and the grace of this next guest on the Blessed with Bray podcast. As the sun-soaked summer days beckon, she embodies the heat, the playfulness, the joy that fills the air. A true embodiment of self-love and personal development, she credits a lot of her transformative journey to the art of yoga, weaving a tapestry of connection and community wherever she goes. She guides her students to find peace and strength on the mats with her sweet soul and calming aura. From the studios of the YTX Austin to her breathtaking retreats worldwide, her teachings meet people with love and care. I feel called to share that in a twist of fate, she met her soulmate Ryan in the serendipitous halls of a $3 a night hostel in China. Stepping into her zones, challenging her comfort zones is her forte. Taking on the invigorating chill of a cold plunge and even becoming the unofficial ambassador for any who dare to take the plunge. So please get ready to be immersed in the wisdom and love that awaits. And join me in providing a warm welcome for the yoga maestro, for the enchanted spirit, for the one and only Morgan Moulckers.
Thank you, Bray. That was quite the introduction.
Welcome. You're welcome. That felt good. Hi, what's up?
Good to be here. I'm super excited for this. Thanks so much for having me here.
Absolutely. I feel very grateful. I love podcasting because in our busy life, it allows an opportunity for us to connect deeper. And I've always enjoyed your presence. Clearly, in the words that I chose in the intro, this is how you show up. And I see it, how you impact other people and just your own following that you created in the yoga community within Austin, which is wild because at the same time, like Austin is such a hub for health and wellness. And sometimes a lot of health and wellness professionals have a lot of fear of not being seen or not being good enough to be themselves in an environment where there's so many yoga instructors, where there's so many coaches, but you shine. So I want to acknowledge that and express my gratitude for you today to taking up or to allowing me to take up some of your time to dive in to a hopeful, insightful conversation. And I would like to just start this conversation warming up and just let's tap into our present life. And I just want to I'm curious, what is the current things that you're just really grateful for? And to sit with that, I want to second that and start thinking towards the future. What is a couple things that you're really excited about?
Things that I'm really grateful for. The first one that comes to mind is community. That's been like a big theme for me over the last, say, about 2 years, like coming out of the end of 2020. I was actually living in South Africa with my now husband, Ryan, for the first part of 2020, had like very specific plans for how that year was going to pan out, and then COVID hit. So I moved back here in the fall of 2020 and then dove back into the yoga scene here at the beginning of 2021. And really since then, first, it was like the first time I've really rooted myself in one place. Like I've traveled a ton and I always prided myself on being more like a vagabond and always able to move around, never needing roots. But I've really put down a lot of roots now and grown an incredible community that I didn't even know was possible, primarily through the yoga scene in the yoga world, but just also through like personal connections, like how we met at Squatch and through like-minded communities. Community is huge for me, like even close friends, family, just knowing that I can't do things alone. I tried to be really independent for a really long time. And then I realized like when I opened myself up to one, not only support of other people, but love and being able to receive appreciation from others has been like pretty life-changing for me in the last 2 years or so. Community is huge. Obviously, my husband Ryan is the most supportive person in the entire world. So I'm like very lucky to have him. I think that's allowed me to blossom a lot over the last 2 years. So he's from Ireland. Took him a while to move here with the green card process. So he didn't actually move here until fall of 2021. It's about 2 years ago, and I've definitely noticed so much self-growth happening since then. And I think that is like very much due to his unwavering support always in everything that I do. And I do quite a bit. He's pretty great with all of that. Gratitude for yoga. That's the practice that I've been very dedicated to for about 10 years now. So I started it when I was still a teenager, and like from the moment I discovered it, I was all in and haven't really ever taken a day where it hasn't been like a big part of my life. So the yoga practice and the ability to get to know myself better and be really grounded in who I am and not get so caught up in like the melodramas of my mind and always being in my head, because I'm a very much like a thinker. And over the past few years, I've become more of a feeler. And then something that I've just been working with a lot lately is gratitude for exactly where I'm at now. For today, I started ending all of my yoga classes with also just a moment of gratitude for waking up today. It's something that we're never guaranteed or
Mm.
promised, and we take it for granted. A lot of people die every single day, and very few people wake up being like, this is my last day to live. So I really try to live in a way that I'd feel okay if I died today because I feel fulfilled. I showed up in the way that I wanted to, and obviously, like, far from perfect. Ego gets in the way, like lots of things get in the way, but just trying to be where I'm at without always trying to be somewhere else. That's a gratitude piece.
Love it. What are we excited about? We'll dive into some of those things.
Lots to be excited about. So tomorrow I'm flying to the Philippines to lead a yoga retreat with 20 people. So I'm super excited for that. That's like the one that's like, I need to go pack. I need to like, get my stuff together,
Yeah.
but super, super excited. It's a surf and yoga retreat. And
Surf.
I haven't been just like on the water surfing in a while. I think the last time I was there, I led a yoga retreat in Costa Rica. That was a yoga surf one. That was really fun. But that was in 2021. And I'm not good. Like I'm not a pro surfer or like anywhere close, but I enjoy it. It'll be nice just to be in nature, be on the beach and with the ocean that I feel like is so really excited about that. And honestly, there's just so many things that have blown up for me that were really just like heart-centered offerings that have been received really well. So I've started doing these half-day retreats that have been like beyond what I could have ever imagined they would be. So I have one of those in September. So I always have the next one planned when one happens. I like know when the date's going to be. So I'm continually excited for the next one of those and have some retreats next year too. So like retreats are firing me up a lot right now. I
Mm.
think people want to travel. They want to be in community, especially after the pandemic. So just by like how well those are received, it's been really exciting. And I've been in this phase probably for the last year or so of just being like obsessed with teaching yoga. Like I've done it for 8 years, but it's like I can't get enough of it. And I did burn myself out of just like running around town, managing like different studio schedules and narrowed where I was teaching a few months ago when I realized I need to be a little bit more like potent in how I show up in the ways that I do versus trying to be everywhere and do all the things. I know we had talked about that a little bit when I was trying to find a
Mhm.
strike a better balance, but just teaching and like connecting with my students who are my community and people that I'm often seeing every single day, if not twice a day, if I'm teaching twice a day, that's something that just brings me more joy than anything else.
Lovely.
Yeah.
There's so much I want to dissect there. The first thing I just want to acknowledge, because you had mentioned we had previous conversations of just time management and pouring things into your passions and
Mhm.
making time for those. And I want to applaud the fact that it seems like you've been doing it. And as you said, there's a lot of things happening because you've been leading from right here. And I want to dive in,
Mhm.
not yet, but to what heart-centered leadership. That's something I'm very empowered by and something that I'm working with men to create more men that are heart-centered leaders.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have a different perception of what that even means. But the first thing, well, a couple of things. One, I love gratitude because I read like recently, and I've seen it before too. That's the number one way to create joy and fulfillment in your life today.
Yeah.
It's always there. And I know for myself, like in the darker moments of my life, it was hard to find things to be grateful for based off the choices that weren't heart centered.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't making those constant choices and I wasn't connected to my soul, I wasn't aligned, I couldn't find the gratitude, which then led to me not being joy and fulfilled. So I'm curious of what are some of the practices? I imagine yoga. So actually, let's go that route. So I imagine yoga has been a journey for yourself to be more heart centered.
Mhm.
And you had mentioned that when you're a teenager, that is when this whole thing started happening for you, and you
Mhm.
were really drawn to it. Can we go back to that moment, those moments in time, and just describe what did that look like? Because when you do something new, especially you talk 10 years of yoga, yoga's been around for a long time, but
Yeah.
it wasn't popular for me growing up. I
Yeah.
was in Indiana. Yoga was I wanted to do hot yoga. I came up when I was like 22 and I had
Mhm.
to come here to do it.
Yeah.
I'm curious of like, how did it get into your life and why did you stick to it?
Good question. So I did grow up in the suburbs of Austin. So
Oh,
Austin,
good.
so yoga was a thing, but I have a gymnastics background. And I remember getting dragged to a yoga class. I think it was senior year of high school. And by some friends of like, oh, just try it. And I was wanting to like maybe go on a run or something afterwards. But I was like, cool, we'll show up and do it. It was a Bikram studio, which is like a very specific style of yoga. It's a very disciplined style. It's a set sequence and it's 105 or 110 degrees.
That
Like
was the first
so
I
hot.
did when I moved here.
It's funny because a lot of people do that as their first, which is
Yeah.
like, I don't know how it doesn't scare everyone away. It
It's
does
scary, but
hook you in. Like now that's not a style that I practice very often. Every now and then I'll go just to like, go back to the roots and remember those early days. But I remember like the entire class, I was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I thought yoga was like stretching and I'm flexible. Like this was meant to be easy. And throughout the class, like I don't think I loved it until the end because it was such a challenge, but it was so different than anything else that I had done. And it was much more introspective than I had been expecting. And at that time, I guess I was like 17. 16 or 17, like you don't know yourself super well. You're like discovering yourself. And I think I got like a little glimpse into what that self-discovery can feel like. And this was also the time like I was applying to colleges and there was so much like transition coming up after high school ending. And like I've always grown up, like I grew up in the same place, went through all the schools with the same people. So it would have been like my first big life transition and first intentional one where I was actually choosing like, okay, I want to go to college. I want to major in this. This is where I want to go. So it came at a time where like I needed that sense of grounding and getting to know myself. And that's been like a huge process. I don't think like I got to know myself immediately. I think
Yeah.
like I'm still very much getting to know myself. And I think it's almost been exponential in like the pace that I've been doing that. Whereas like the self growth that's happened in the last year or 2 years
Mhm.
has been so much more even than all of those years before that combined. Because I think I needed to get to a certain point of just feeling rooted, feeling grounded with where I'm at. But back to that yoga class, I remember going towards like finishing the class, having this like inner peace and stillness that I just didn't know was possible. And I didn't know that was something that should be in my life or that I was missing until I experienced it. And the studio, it was like, I want to say it was probably like January 30th or something, like end of January. And they were starting a February challenge. It was a 28-day challenge. And it was doing 28 classes in 28 days. And I'm like a pretty intense person and competitive. And I was like, yeah, I can do this, like for sure. So I signed up for that straight away and then just did not, I like probably went 30 classes in those days, didn't miss. I would go like 6 a.m. classes every day before high school. And like at that point, if you're doing that for a month straight, like you realize how it makes you feel. From there on, I just like was like, this is my thing.
Wow, that's so cool. The word that's coming up for me that I want to dive into is enlightened. And I find that people get enlightened at different phases in their life. And you can be enlightened more often more. It's a spiritual regrowth or growth that's
Yeah.
evolving over time. The more that you get connected with deeper levels of consciousness. And I think one of the key things to find that, as you said, is inner peace. I believe this is a side caveat, but I believe that we have world peace when everyone has inner peace inside them,
Yeah.
right? And I want to share an example of I know you may not follow the NBA, but there's a basketball player that's coming up and he
Mhm.
just got drafted, #1 pick. He's 17. He's literally going to change the game. He hasn't played yet, but he seems like a world class, like LeBron James plus 10. But the way he was interviewed and the way he spoke is he was just so as a 17, like so grounded and in tune with himself and understood and had this like greater understanding of the universe. I'm like, whoa, there's something here. And the reason I share that is I find, we're always a product of our environment and the people, our mentors and the people we're around. And this is no shame to my parents or their
Mhm.
parents and my environment, but like I didn't find this connection to want to really understand myself until I
Yeah.
was like deep in the hole when I was 20.
Yeah.
That's when that curiosity started happening. And it sounds like for you at 17, you found yoga as a practice to create that groundness and that inner peace, which developed that connection. Yes, that connection was still maybe weak per se, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word, and it's gotten stronger with consistency and more
Yeah.
understanding of how to tap into it even more. And I guess where my question is going is, what do you think when it comes to being enlightened and understanding yourself at a deeper level of consciousness? Why do you think that is so important when it comes to being a heart-centered human being or leader?
So I'll caveat that I certainly don't think I'm enlightened. I'm obviously always trying to build
What
awareness.
does enlightened mean to you?
I guess the way I see enlightened is like you are all knowing, you are like all
Yeah.
peace.
Let me dive back. I
Yeah.
believe awareness
Yeah.
is a level of enlightenment.
Yeah.
I think it's still
Love.
we're at level whatever age we're at. I
Yeah.
keep getting leveled up,
Yeah.
but as you shared earlier, your capacity to level up in that regard has gotten better.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to understand that. Let's go down that route. Why do you think that is the case? Your ability to be more grounded in inner peace and understand yourself better and grow.
Yeah. So I think, not to use just like a metaphor, but like an onion, like
Mm,
peeling away the layers of the onion. Like there's so many like identities that we tie ourselves to and that we hold so closely. Okay, this is who we are. Like this is who I am. This is who my partner is. This is my job title. This is how much money I have. This is even holding identities. I am an impressive or intelligent person. I am this or that way. And I think for me, the process of self discovery has been okay, what's underneath all of that? Who am I really? Not by what I'm doing or the titles that I have, but what is my heart saying when I get out of my thinking mind, which is like the part that's really loud. my intuition, like it's much quieter. And you had to find that stillness to be able to do that. And I think the reason that it started with me pretty young during yoga was like probably a lot of teenage girls. I had a lot of insecurity, especially around just body image, which looking back is so sad. But that's just the conditioning.
Yeah.
So I think I was interested in yoga because I was like, okay, cool. It's supposed to be a good workout, like lean, long muscles, all of the things. And I think what it teaches you is that you need to fully love yourself and work on your self relationship, that relationship to that inner self, to then be able to extend love to other people and other beings. And I think like it all goes so hand in hand. And I think a lot of that is like accepting exactly where you're at without needing to change or control anything about your experience at the present moment, recognizing that your very nature is that you're whole and complete, perfect as you are. You're where you're meant to be. There's not these external things that we need, whether that's for body image or something like diet and exercise and this new program and now like these new weight loss drugs, like all these things. For me, a lot of times it was, oh, I need additional training and more certifications and more
Mm.
education so that I feel confident to share what's already inside. So when I made that shift to, okay, how can I be in service to others and share my gifts, even if I don't feel like I've already arrived as like the greatest teacher that there is, how do I get past that imposter syndrome and share from a place of my heart or of love that's in service to others and then release the outcome? Enjoy the process,
Yes.
not be so tied to a destination. And I'm somebody that used to always write my 1-year goals, my 5-year goals. I had everything planned. And I'm actually pretty grateful for the way the pandemic affected me and impacted my life is like all of that kind of had to
Shattered.
disappear.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to step back and rethink the way that I was approaching life,
Mm.
which like was more like athlete mentality and not yoga mentality.
I love it. There's a few illusions I want to dive into. There's this idea of being selfish and selfless in regards to yourself and respecting your own well being and health. And
Yeah.
there's this illusion of protecting your energy so you can show up better for others. And
Mhm.
I'm going to start with that one. The reason I call it an illusion is because this has been my own realization and my own experience of sometimes wanting to protect my energy so much because I know I only have so much to give
Yeah.
that I tend to get in this place of pushing people away. And then why that's not good for me is because I believe in being of service and spreading your gifts to the world and sharing those gifts. And I know
Yeah.
my gift and how I can impact someone's day in 20 seconds, in 10 seconds. So the idea of pushing people away, in theory, might be good from the outside perspective of setting boundaries, which I understand that.
Mm.
But if I am not feeling good because I am not staying open and I'm closing myself off, then in return, it starts weighing me down over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think the other illusion that I see is this, and this is more less in the health community, more from a bigger spectrum of the world of it's selfish to care for yourself first before you
Mhm.
help others. But the reality is, if you don't go down that route, one, you don't know who you are. Like
Yeah.
if you haven't done the inner work of and really treating and taking care of yourself and knowing the things that you're drawn to and knowing, as you said, that how you want to show up in the world and knowing that you have gifts to give, you can't know those things until you start doing the work on yourself. And
Mhm.
and then you can provide so much more for everyone around you.
Yeah.
And now you're more what I would say in an aligned place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something that I've been like funneling around with in regards to creating more heart-centered male leaders is this idea of alignment, awareness, action, acceptance, accountability. It's this forever loop.
Yeah.
This loop that gets first, alignment is the most important one.
Yeah.
Because to me, you can't have hyper awareness until you have complete alignment. And
Mm.
the avenue to get into that complete alignment is through health, finding that most healthiest version of yourself through physical health. How are we pushing our body? How are we moving our body? How are we treating our body? How are we feeding our body? How are we hydrating our body?
Mm.
From mental health, how are we seeking challenges? How are we doing cold plunges? How are we doing things that scare us?
Yeah.
How are we speaking in front of people, leading people, having the courage to not to know that we are enough now and we don't need to go get other certifications and other degrees and things of that nature. Emotional health, how are we sharing our feelings, expressing ourselves, being vulnerable, telling our truth, sharing our truth, and then spiritual health. How are we being of service? How are we how are we not centering the universe around ourselves? And I think to me, through those 4 components and then those 5 A's, you create a heart-centered leader. That
Mhm.
is my own
I
formula that
like
I'm
that.
sitting with.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if you were to develop a formula today and say, hey, I want to, and you're already doing it through your actions. And another thing
Mhm.
I want to acknowledge you for, I bring healers on here. I think that you are a healer, and every person, every guest I'm gonna have is healing at some capacity, whether they identify as that or as not or not.
Yeah.
I believe in the way you show up, it is healing for people. And I'm just curious if you were to, if you were to develop a formula to create more heart-centered leaders, what would that look like?
Putting me on the spot.
I got trust.
I'd say the first one is self-knowledge. So, like, that you mentioned, like, world peace earlier and how that really starts with inner peace. And I think in the same way that sometimes there's a misconception that it's selfish to focus on yourself, really it can be selfless because then it allows you to show up for others. If you find that peace from within, that's, like, contagious. If you're living a very fulfilled and aligned life, that's contagious and it affects the people around you because you just vibrate at a higher frequency. So I think self-knowledge and self-awareness is super important, and that's like table stakes. And that's why I love the practice of yoga, because people think of it as this physical thing. Ooh, I can do a handstand, arm balances, all these fancy things, which for a while was my focus in yoga, with the threading of always wanting to get to know myself a little bit more deeply. And now lately, I'm like, actually, that does not matter. It's simply a container for us to turn inward. And if that's through these different poses or through this different breath work, that's all great. That gets us there. But the objective is to start to find that stillness from within and give us the space to get to know ourselves. So I think self-knowledge, I think curiosity and an open mind in turn with an open heart, just being open to the things you don't know.
Yeah.
If you're like, I know this is fact, or not even fact per se, but I've definitely been somebody that's, okay, I like have all this education. I have these credentials and certifications. Like, I know stuff. And then that blocks me from everything I don't know. So just having a very open mind and always being curious. So in Buddhism, there's a concept of the beginner's mind, or like a blue sky mind, having it very open. So self-knowledge, curiosity, open mind, intention. What was the very first one that you
Intention,
mentioned?
It was in regards to the alignment.
Alignment. So I
Yeah.
think intention is very similar to alignment. And I think they're different, but like in the yoga practice, you always start with an intention. And that the way that I interpret intention is getting clear on, I like to focus on a feeling, like a feeling state of how I want to show up in everything that I do. It can also be seen more as a prayer or an intention to bridge from where you're at now to what this highest self version of you looks like. And I don't always love the term highest self because I think that's like something that gets thrown around a lot without always
That intention.
Yeah, without intention. It becomes like it's a buzzword. But really the way I see that is like the most connected, most spiritually connected version of myself. What is it that I'm striving toward? And then how can I release whatever the outcome or destination is and trust the process so that my attention or my awareness is in the present and it stays there. And then I hold this higher intention that then can manifest so long as I trust the process and don't try to control the outcome. And I guess the fourth thing that I'll put is open-heartedness. So I mentioned that with open-mindedness, but I think I'm somebody that likes to wear my heart on my sleeve. I'd rather live life in a way where I feel all of the emotions, where I put myself out there, where I allow myself to get hurt, to be vulnerable after so many years of being very closed off, being very in my mind, trying to control every single outcome, every single process, and not really allowing people in. Like I've always cared a lot about the people in my life, but I always prioritized my work. And whether that was like schoolwork in college, whether that was different corporate jobs and careers that I was in out of college, whether that's like my yoga work and my passion, now work that I'm doing with nutrition, I think allowing yourself to be open to experiencing life in the present moment without being guarded is super critical. And I know like heart-centered leadership, obviously, open heart is an important part, but that's really something that's been a theme for me that's come up in the past year. That was like my big intention for this year is how do I just always lead with love? How do I, one, just become more aware of feelings that are inside me? And if resentment starts to build or like any sort of negative emotions build, like that shit's too hard to carry. How can I let that go and instead just be a beacon of love? Because that's going to spread to others as well. And that's like really where I found the most like transformation, the most healing, and the most connection with others.
Lead with love. Beautiful. I want to play a scenario for you.
Okay.
Because I think it's very common, the story that you just shared within yourself. It was briefly, but like in terms of needing to control outcomes. And that's very what we would call the hyper masculine, right? Of
Mhm.
this, oh, I need to do this and this because this is just how it is.
Yeah.
And that blocks you from actually being in the present and being more flowing, allowing things to come to you. And not, and there's a lot of lack of trust there with that too.
Yeah.
So I want to play a scenario. We have a new yogi coming into your room, and how does that show up? Because as I know a lot of people deal with this. So how does that show up in the yoga studio? People who are just not allowing it to come to them and really are forcing the scenario and really trying to control the yoga experience. How does that show up in your room? And how do you communicate them and assist them through it?
I think it's a process. So I think there's evolution and there's revolution. My friend Carter Miles, who's like my all-time favorite teacher and now a very close friend that I do now, like different retreats and events with as well. He shared that framing because I was reflecting on that. I was like, why is it sometimes that someone can go on a retreat or to an event or something that dives deeper, and it's like this thing takes place that changes everything about their physical practice, about their spiritual connection, or it shines a light on something that they didn't even know was there. And then how is it that people that have a consistent practice, whether that looks like once a week or looks like every single day, whether that's a spiritual practice of going on a walk in nature, it doesn't have to be yoga, but you see that same kind of evolution and growth happen, but that might be over time, where sometimes it can happen like in a snap in the right environment. And the way he framed it to me was those deeper experiences often are those revolutionary experiences where you create the space and you're open enough to have that shift occur. And then the things that you're disciplined about, that you're committing to, again, that can be daily practice, that's where the evolution takes place. And I think, so it very rarely happens. If someone shows up to yoga class, has never taken my class before or never taken a class, I'm not expecting that by the end they're going to feel a new level of enlightenment, for instance. But I do want them to feel comfortable being exactly where they're at in their practice. They probably don't know what any of the poses are. That's okay. Not about the physical. And I talk about that a ton as I teach. Like all of these concepts I share a lot when I teach. It's really not about the physical. The asana, which is the physical practice of yoga, there's 8 limbs of yoga. It's one of the 8 limbs and arguably like the least important one. But it's how we get people in. It's typically how people come to the practice. They don't normally come for, I want that deep state of concentration. And then over time, they start to experience those little glimpses of what that inner stillness can feel like.
Evolution.
And you're like, oh, I want more of that. How do I invite in more of that? Whether it's through the consistent practice that you have or it's through the way that you're showing up in your interactions off the mat. It's the space and stillness you're allowing in your life. It's the mindfulness that you approach your job. It's the mindset that you have. If you have a mindset of gratitude and you're always looking for the things to be grateful for in the present moment versus searching for what's not there. You're living in like a want or desire or craving state. That's going to pull you out of the present moment and pull you away from yourself. So yeah, I don't think it happens instantaneously in most cases. I've seen it happen in like retreat settings where people are in it and they're able to truly disconnect from the rest of their life. But I think a lot of us can't just fly away to the Philippines for a week or even give a full day to be somewhere. I think the true practice of yoga is the way that you live your life, your ordinary life. I talk to a lot of students that are really interested. They're always like interested in the retreats, like the sexy feeling things that are like these big, awesome things. I'm like, those are awesome. Obviously, they cost a lot more money than just like staying here, working on yourself, doing your practice. Like yoga can be free, which is like the beautiful part. It can be really simple. There's YouTube out there. Like you don't even need to be paying to go to a studio. You can do all this work here. And I always remind people of that if they're like wanting to do some retreat, they're stressed about the finances of it. I'm like, so why is it that you're really wanting to do it? Are you wanting to escape from your life and then experience? Do you have expectations that you're going to experience this like deep revelation or you're like essentially running away or retreating? Or can you just have a little bit more discipline in your daily life, more gratitude for what you already have, and focus on the very simple things that will over time oftentimes take you a lot farther than these big fun things?
Yeah. Evolution versus revolution. I love that.
That's a good one.
I want to go down both lanes there. And real quick on revolution, I think I can't judge anyone. I can't understand anyone's inner calling to go do something.
Yeah.
If they're called to go do a retreat, then sure. But there's sometimes some underlying conditional things in culture that's happened. Ayahuasca is a perfect example of that. People who do that a lot are drawn to that. And I'm not here to judge, but are you doing it because there's an inner calling to do it? Or are you doing it just out of fact? Exactly. So I think understanding that and making those aligned heart-centered choices is important. And I
Yeah.
think the evolution of yoga will allow you to understand that alignment and make those better choices in the future. So having
Yeah.
that as the foundation to build on first before you go down the big revolution route.
Yeah. And I
So
think it's a mix of both. And sorry, I didn't mean to
no, for
interrupt, but
sure.
I think that's the beauty of it is especially if you're allowing this evolution to unfold, these revolutions also happen. And that can be seen as like a spiritual awakening. It can be so many different shifts that happen. And I've been super grateful for the moments where I've had those revolutionary experiences that have shifted my way of being, essentially. But you also need the evolution and you need like the daily, consistent, just like part of your life is getting to know yourself better and choosing to work on yourself versus staying stagnant.
Here's how I want to describe evolution versus revolution. So I mentioned the circle, and I
Yeah.
think there's a consistent circle of life that's happening, right? And that circle can get either, I don't know if it's getting bigger or getting smaller, but that's the evolution. There's this constant little change that's happening. But revolution is when we break the loop,
Mm.
right? And we create a new circle that we're building so let's say it's small and now it's getting bigger. It's like a
Yeah.
tree that's planted and it's getting
Yeah.
bigger and bigger. I have found that I can't control when I have those revolutionary experiences. I have to
Correct.
just
Yeah.
continue to do the things that are drawn to me. Mushrooms have been a beautiful journey to allow me to make those revolutionary or break that loop more
For
often
sure.
than not. And I imagine, as you shared earlier, that people within your retreats have experienced that.
Mm.
And I'm curious if there's any specific stories that come to mind of some of your students that have gone to one of your retreats and had this revolutionary experience that you would like to share.
There's a lot, so I can share a couple in a moment. And just to talk on, you mentioned mushrooms. And I think why mushrooms are so revolutionary for a lot of people is that they dissolve your ego. And when your ego gets out of the way, you allow and you surrender and you trust a lot more. And I think that's the same desired outcome of yoga. Oftentimes, it's a lot more work to do it that way. Like,
Conversation.
yeah. And I see yoga as like a moving meditation. The ultimate objective being like at the end of it, it should be a meditative experience. You should find that inner stillness. So that can look like heated power yoga, like Bikram yoga. It can look like being very still. It could look like yoga nidra. There's so many types of yoga and there's specific styles that I like to teach. And I have a specific way of styling or sequencing my classes, but ultimately it's all getting to the same destination, which is like that inner stillness and being able to observe the ego as well. And then choose to put that aside, get out of the thinking mind and be like, how is it that I'm feeling? What is my intuition saying? And something that I've been working with is we make decisions and choices every day, all day. Really tapping into my intuition, be like, okay, get out of my head of what it is that I should do. Because I shared that I'd gotten pretty burnt out for a while and didn't have a ton of boundaries around like opportunities that were flooding in my way. I was like, the me 1 year ago or 2 years ago would have been so grateful for this. I can't say no to it. But then I was burning myself out. So then taking a step back and one, not feeling urgency to give answers straight away and actually being able to sit with it and be like, how do I feel? Does it feel really calming and grounding to say yes? Probably the right decision. Or does it feel chaotic or confusing? Am I questioning myself? Then that tells me that maybe that's not something that's aligned right now to what I should be doing.
And it could be 3 months down the road.
Yeah.
That's like the fear, right? We want to make
Yeah.
that because we might lose this opportunity, but no, everything is divine in the moment of life,
Yeah.
like whether it's bad or good.
Yeah. And that's like scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset and something that I've worked with a lot because I've taught yoga for a long time. I've shared it in different ways. I wasn't teaching in Austin in this community until beginning of 2021. I'd done it some in college, had moved away, had a very intense strategy consulting job where I was traveling every single week, Monday through Thursdays in different cities all the time. So I was like very lucky to have different studio connections that were like hosting me as guest teacher in these places. So I was maintaining my teaching and that's what drew me to doing retreats. If I'm not grounded in one place where I can just have a student base from where I live, part of my community, I can build community through people wanting to travel with me. And then it's like those revolutionary experiences. We're going to go a lot deeper. So that was like how I transitioned into starting to do retreats. And I found so much fulfillment through that. And that's also part of why I was like, oh, community is like really what I care about. But I've only actually been in the yoga scene, which is a scene here. There's a lot of yoga teachers and there's a lot of It feels a little competitive at times, and I think I got a little caught up in that feeling when I first started of feeling like not enough, whereas I used to just always share yoga for the joy of sharing yoga. It wasn't about, like, class sizes or anything like that, and I think, like, being in downtown Austin where it's such a mecca for yoga, you start to think about those things, like, a lot of studios pay you based on those things, give you the classes you want based on those things.
As you shared, being a heart-centered leader, we don't get caught up in the ego of that type of thought process, but it
Yeah,
happens, and that's why I shared at the very beginning that I wanted to acknowledge that it is challenging in this space. It can be challenging in this environment of Austin as
for
well. There's so many leaders in this space, and I have found even within myself that I have to I have to keep checking in with myself because I'll have this moment where a friend, whether he just did a cool thing with a brand or he got paid to go to the speaking gig or did that, I'm like, wow, why is that not me? Like, why am
yeah,
I not there? And I'm like, no, like this is not leading with love. This is not how I want to show up as. And
yeah.
that's where that self check, that self assessment, that check in with yourself. Like, is this a thought that I should be ashamed of? It's a thought. It comes up. Thoughts come up, but we give power to those thoughts. So
Yeah.
if I don't get power to it, then it's not a real thought at the end of the day.
And scarcity mindset makes us believe that there's not enough to go around or that essentially our gift is not unique or have power and that it comes from us. So, like, the big shift, yeah. And so the big shift I needed to make was being able to say no to opportunities and then seeing it as like a blessing that I could give other teachers the opportunity. Okay, I don't need these things coming. Like, I might want to
Mm.
hold on to all of them because my ego wants to be like, oh, this is cool. I would have wanted this opportunity a year ago. And like, I need to hold on to it, or then it might not be mine, or then I might lose my student following or something like that. And what's been really beautiful, and when I got burnt out, I took a step back and I actually cut back on like half of what I was doing publicly in terms of like my just yoga class offering. And it was really nice because like now some of my really close, like teachers that I'm really close with that are also friends, like are the ones teaching those things that I was. Ability to recognize that was not serving me at the moment has then freed up opportunity and abundance for other people. And there's been abundance flooding my way as well. Like I've still got new opportunities. I'm able to focus my energy on things that I'm creating versus being a teacher for people that are creating other things, which is also beautiful. But I'm really in the phase of wanting to create my own.
I want to tap into something real quick
Yeah.
that just came up. I believe, and this is why I keep coming back to this heart-centered leadership idea, that when you lead with love and you lead with your heart, that opportunities just keep coming. You can call it serendipity, you can call it luckiness, you can call it blessings, you can call it omens, you can call it so many different things. But
Yeah.
I feel when you are really aligned with yourself and you're from this place of abundance, you're in a place of service, that whether you believe in God or not, these things are happening. It just I can't make sense of it
Hmm.
sometimes. And I'm like, when bad things are happening to you, I believe everything happens for a reason. There's some bad things that happen in the world and
Yeah.
bad things that happen that we call good people. But I had to believe that there's some type of internal war, internal conflict that people are going through that's allowing this outside thing to happen to them or for them. And I think it serves as a reminder that whether you're in the darkness or the light, that this too shall pass, and to be getting back to being present with yourself. And if you're finding yourself in a place where I like giving an analogy of drowning in a way because you have so much weight on you and you're trying
Yeah.
to get above water to breathe. Like, I just want to breathe. That it's time to look at yourself and like, how can you shed some weight? And some of that weight is scarcity mindset. Some of that weight
Hmm.
is ego. Some of that weight is hate, judgment, and really have practices to be able to shed that weight.
Hmm.
And you weren't born immediately understanding this. As we've expressed, we've enlightened ourselves. We've became more aware of
Yeah.
ourselves over time. Outside of yoga, what are some other practices that you have done to allow you to shed the weight off, to trust the process, to lead with love?
So I guess with yoga, there's the physical, as I explained, but it's like a way of being, is the way that I see it. So I'm like, my whole life and everything is yoga in a sense. But I think learning that self trust that might come to me through the container of yoga, but it might come to others through just like providing space for stillness and introspection. I think stillness is really key. You need time and space to integrate. Reading has also been like a phenomenal teacher for me. I read a lot.
When you
When do I read?
Mhm.
Whenever I can. I like early mornings. I like evening. Throughout the day, I'll try to take breaks. My favorite thing to do is after I teach a yoga class, I always have one or two books in my car. Go to Barton Springs, even if it's an hour that I can spend there reading.
Sure. I think reading is fascinating and I go in and out of it. And I
Yeah,
think it's powerful for everyone for so many different reasons.
yeah.
What is your practice of reading in terms of like, How are you called to certain books? Do you finish the book? What is the time frame?
Yeah.
Do you have this, oh, I wish I remembered thing? Do you revisit the same books? How does that work for you?
I reread books a lot and I go through phases. I started really in college. Like I was like someone in college. I woke up at 5 a.m. I was like needed to balance masculine, feminine
Yeah,
energy. I
yeah,
was
yeah.
like fully just like achievement mode, was like 5 a.m., wake up, do all the right things, just very structured. Tried to be a little bit better about that. I still do those early morning hours though. Oftentimes I read like a book or two every single week, if not more. Like sometimes I like to just sit down and obviously like books are all different lengths. So like a really dense book, I like take a lot more time with. But I probably read in like ways that are maybe a little bit unique. I like to read multiple books at the same time because depending on the day, I just see what I feel called to read. Sometimes it's a little bit lighter. I don't read a ton of fiction. I go through phases. Like if I'm on a long plane journey or something, either audiobook or reading, I enjoy like a nice fiction story. But a lot of it is like on spirituality. There's definitely been phases where I like dive really into like deep nutritional science and all of that because that's like something that I'm very passionate about and have got a lot of education on. But things that would probably fall in the self-help category are what I'm pulled to. And a lot of that is like Buddhist philosophy and loving kindness. A lot of it is books like on yoga and the tradition of yoga and all the different teachings, because that always improves my teaching and returns me to the roots of this practice that's thousands of years old, but is a very modern new thing as well here. I like to read the same books. Like a book that really affects me, I will read it so many different times. So there's a couple, and they're not all similar. One that I've read, I just read it again. And then it's like you read it for a third or fourth time. It's like pretty quick to read. Is Big Magic by Liz Gilbert. And that's all about like creative living and surrendering to the creative process and allowing inspiration to flood in. And that was a really powerful book to read. Probably every 2 years I've read it. And at this point in my life, the big takeaway I got was don't put so much pressure on your passions to support your entire lifestyle, or don't put pressure on your passions to make you money necessarily, because it should be a passion. And it talks a lot about following your dharma, which is a spiritual and yoga concept that you're probably familiar with, but it's essentially what can you give to the world that no one else can in the way that you're able to do it? Like, what is your gift that then by following your dharma, you are in service to others? So I feel pretty confident that my dharma is through teaching, and that's teaching yoga, it's teaching mindfulness and presence. And also, I mean, I love teaching about nourishment and nutrition and a lot of these other things and like how we combine all of that essentially back to like relationship with body and self. And then through that self, relationship with God or higher power, whoever it is, and your own understanding how you define that. So I really enjoyed that book. There's another book called One Simple Thing by Eddie Stern. It's a yoga book, but it's like something I come to all the time and reread frequently because it's just a really good reminder into one, why do I love this practice? It makes it so simple because there's always, okay, new poses, new transitions, like people doing these different creative things. And okay, it brings you back to the basics. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. And then I really like just like philosophy books, spiritually oriented philosophy books, like those I'll return to.
What's your favorite philosophy book? I love philosophy.
Now I'm like, is it actually considered philosophy? But like somebody that I really enjoy learning from and reading from is Michael Singer. So that's like really a spirituality book. I just recently discovered David Hawkins' Letting Go. Again, another book that my friend Carter Miles shared with me, and he had shared it because that like really transformed his life. And that was really powerful for me. And he had told me about the book for a long time, but it came at the right time. And it's all about letting go, essentially, of any negative emotions or feelings rather than holding on to them. It's somewhat practical ways of letting them go and surrendering. So it's surrender, it's trust.
But what are the practical ways?
A lot of it is mindset, as you're very familiar with, but it's noticing, okay, if I'm feeling shame about something or I'm feeling guilt about something, how do you then replace those with acceptance, which is something that is a positive feeling? How do you replace it with joy? How do you replace it with love? So there's like a different scale of, and actually you can do muscle testing to understand like these different frequencies that these different feelings.
You say muscle testing?
So you can actually see in muscle testing that these things it's essentially a scale. I think it's 200 to 1,000. And it's these different frequencies that scientists have actually measured, like shame being the lowest. I want to say that's 200.
Low is bad. We want to be high
Low
frequency.
is bad.
Yeah,
Sorry. Shame is closer to 0. 200 is the point that it flips to neutral and then turns to positive. So the ones that are like below neutral, and I'm not going to include all of them because it's been a little bit,
Yeah,
but
you're good.
it's like shame is the lowest. That when you feel shame, like embarrassed, you feel weak. So if you're getting muscle tested, you can actually see your muscles go weak. And you can feel that. If you're embarrassed about something, like you get that feeling in your stomach, your arms drop, like that is like a feeling that manifests in your body. All feelings manifest in your body.
Have you read Daring Greatly by Brene Brown?
Yes. It's been a long time since I read it, but
She talks
that's
about
great.
this and
Okay.
shame with how it just weighs us down and different routes
Yeah.
to being vulnerable to
Yeah.
allow that shame to release and reframing the story, recreating the story,
Yeah.
allowing for acceptance, all these different things are important. And I think it's easy, not easy, it's easier for us to say those things because we're in such a grounded place
Yeah.
and we understand ourselves. But I want to real quick, in terms of how you read, I'm not surprised because you're very into flow and you're not attached to a specific, I need to finish this book. Or if
Mhm.
you don't like a book, you're not here and you're revisiting. That's where I'm kind of falling back is I want to keep revisiting books more
Yeah.
often than not and tap into that because these are the things I align with. There's so much information out there. You got to find the information that's really calling to you that your soul connects with and then
Mhm.
sit with that and revisit that because that's how it's going to allow you to find your gift. You find your gift through experience and books
Yeah.
is one outlet to
Mhm.
understand yourself better because you're reading
Yeah.
things and sometimes you don't make these connections until you actually read something. A book for me was Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. Like
Mhm.
I always believed in the impossible at some capacity, but that like scientifically concreted in my mind of how powerful it is to be a human being
Yeah.
and how much we can evolve. And I want to circle back to the evolution and revolution real quick because I believe complacency is a silent killer. And you mentioned being stagnant and
Mhm.
having stagnant energy at some capacity. And I find it's hard to evolve and especially hard to revolutionize yourself if you're in complacency. And I think that's why these retreats can be so powerful because it's taking you out of your normal day to day. Even if
Yeah.
you practice yoga, it's okay, you're evolving, but it's sometimes I just realized that when I went to Colorado, like I have such a built, beautiful ecosystem of life. But as a creator, I am doing a lot. I have all this stimulation, all this energy going through me that I start to not being as aligned as I should be. And I know the
Yeah.
power of nature and the healing energy, but until you're actually there and you break that cycle, I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel so good. But I want to connect these dots. So in terms of, I'm trying to connect that dot. What was the dot? I think feeling safe is an important route for people to be able
Yeah.
to make better choices that are in alignment and also going and breaking the cycle of understanding to revolutionize yourself. So I'm curious the environment, how you create the type of environment that you create within these retreats that
Mhm.
allow people to lean into really feeling safe and allowing them to let go and potentially create a revolution. There's a lot of retreats across the world, a lot of different leaders. How do you create the container?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think there's the balance of being out of your comfort zone and still feeling grounded and having that like psychological safety as you shared. So, like, I'd say this is true for retreats and it's also true in a yoga class and like the environment that I try to create or that I intend to always create. How do you safely get out of your comfort zone in a way that you still feel supported? That can be like you feel my presence as a teacher. I intend to be a strong presence in the room, and I've stepped into that a lot more in the last couple of years in my teaching, and I'm seeing that be more transformative for people. But knowing that you're supported on a retreat, knowing that you're also supported in a community, like I also have like ground rules that I always make a retreat journal that goes over like essentially like you're choosing to be here. This is how we support this container that all of us are on here together. And naturally, I've always gotten so lucky the right people come. It's self-selecting.
We call it, but it's serendipity, it's God, it's all the
Yeah.
things. But yeah,
Yeah, it's always, like, the perfect group for what it is, and I've actually really never had an issue with anyone that's come on a retreat, which has been or really, like, with anything I've done because somebody that's not mindful, that's not intentional, like, across the world and doing a retreat that's meant to bring deeper presence, deeper intention, asks you to turn inward and to dive deeper, to see what's there, to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to feel, and a lot of times things that come up are not always pleasant.
can you dissect? Yes, I believe everyone's there for the same reason. They chose that path, but everyone's at a different spectrum of like their ability to let go.
Yeah.
And can you see that within that experience and within the retreat of like when people finally you can see them and feel them let go versus the people holding on? And
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Yeah, when you brought up retreat like transformations earlier, and I forgot to actually share some examples, but so something that I actually do in my half day retreat here too. And just to take a step back, the reason I created these half-day retreats were I love doing these international retreats, but they're not always accessible for somebody, one, to be able to leave for a week or to invest in all the costs associated with flying across the world for a week on a retreat. And one of the most profound experiences I had on a yoga retreat was in a cacao ceremony that was hosted. It was at a retreat in Guatemala that I was leading, but there was a local shaman that had led it. And I saw the power of cacao and how that really actually energetically opened people's hearts and felt this connection with everyone. Everyone cried. I hadn't cried in actually a long time. I was very closed-hearted at the time, I think. I was very much in execution mode. This was one of my first retreats in this like consulting job at the time, and was like, this sounds cool to do retreats and I want to be able to keep sharing yoga. But that cacao ceremony, I saw one, like everyone cry, which was like a really beautiful cathartic experience, like cathartic release. And in these half-day retreats, like cacao ceremony is part of them because I saw what it did to people when we were in this environment. And then I see what it does to people when they're like setting their intention. They're also like infusing this cacao with gratitude. And it is energetically and physically an actual heart opener with the way that it affects your circulation and everything. I've seen people out of retreat, divorce rates probably high, like people realize what's not in alignment. And I shouldn't just say divorce, but any kind of partnership ending or friendship ending of like you start to get really clear on what's aligned and what's not. So I've seen big life changes happen from people. It's also always at the end of a retreat when I feel the most connected to myself, most spiritually connected, and have that strong sense of just inner knowing that I'm doing what I'm meant to be, that I'm like fulfilling my dharma, I'm following it, and just trusting. It obviously shows up for people in a lot of different ways. Like you said, like people come with all different kinds of backgrounds. Some people have had a spiritual practice for a really long time and they're already pretty connected to themselves. And some people that might be the very first glimpse or maybe the first revolution where they experience that there's actually something more, or that life can be so much greater than you might have thought it could. And you get that feeling of being fully alive. Because I don't think people feel that in our typical life. Our life is not designed in like society to feel alive and to feel liberated. There's so many societal structures that are like, we don't want people to feel liberated. We want to control people. And without getting into all of that, when you start to experience, especially as like a leader or a teacher, when I see those revelations happening and I see that sense of liberation in somebody, that also is so connected, like freedom and peace and forgiveness happen, letting go of resentment. And a lot of times it's not something that I can always so clearly see, like it can be felt. But then, and sometimes it takes it maybe a year after a retreat or an experience ended that someone will come back to me and share what happened for them and like how profound and impactful it was. And that's why I like kept doing them, because I'm like, this is my calling to be able to offer these experiences because it holds the space for this transformation to happen. And there's nothing more rewarding than that.
The coming fully alive thing, that's something I really resonate with. I think there's a quote, I forget what it was, but it's along the lines of we need more people who are coming fully alive. It's that simple.
It's contagious.
It's contagious,
Yeah.
exactly. But real quick, story time. Give me something of an experience. You just shared a light that people came a year afterwards and shared, like it could be, just give me one story.
I'll tie it back to Guatemala retreat that I had done. And this was like after this cacao ceremony. And this was actually very beginning of 2020. It was like right before COVID happened. And manifestation, I feel, is also one of those buzzwords right now where everyone is, let me teach you how to manifest your dream life. And like, it's a lot of fluff, or it like doesn't include, like it doesn't
Just
always,
the action.
yeah. And it doesn't always, it's not always transparent about like the actual healing process that needs to happen for you to be able to connect with yourself in a way to even understand your heart's desires, to listen to your heart. And then it's a process of trust and surrender for something to manifest. As I mentioned earlier, there's like intention in the future, attention in the present. And then as long as you detach from the outcome, which are all different spiritual concepts and like yoga concepts that have names like aparigraha and stuff in yoga, but like is non-attachment or non-clinging in yoga.
Non-attachment, non-clinging. I
yeah,
like that.
That's essentially no expectation, no need to control, and no need for the outcome. So it's healthy to have desires that you want to manifest so long as you completely detach from the outcome and you allow the process to unfold. So at this retreat, the last morning of it, I led like a visualization meditation, and it was all about, and it was actually like I didn't have any training in doing. It was the first time that I just felt called that morning to do it. And I was like, let's just drop in and do it. And we had the cacao ceremony the night before. Everyone
You're
was like
ready.
hugging and crying and all these things the night before. So people were open. And I think you need a certain level of openness, obviously,
Yeah.
and to be able to trust. But the meditation, essentially, it was like a snapshot of your future life, your highest life, whatever you want to call it. And it was getting really specific to what's included, down to the smells of the room that you're in and the colors and the textures of where you're at, and really getting into that feeling state of how you feel in your body, that like groundedness, that centeredness, that open-heartedness, and what all is going on, whether like through your career, like we went through all the different things, through your family, and that like once that ended, like people were sharing what it is that came up for them. And it was really beautiful because two of the girls were like, I've been really wanting to get pregnant and start a family. And I saw myself with this beautiful baby. I saw myself, like one of the women was already married, one was not. I saw myself with my husband's, whatever. Both of those women, and sorry, the one that wasn't married was in a very serious relationship. Then she did see herself with that guy.
Yeah.
Literally, when the pandemic started, like a month later, both of them at the same time got pregnant. So this was like a couple months then after that. But like essentially, they could have been pregnant as they were having that as well, or it could have come after. I can't remember the exact timing, but it was like this beautiful thing when they shared it, because they shared it with the group, each of them separately. And they both happened to be like living in Dallas. So then they like when they were
Oh,
pregnant and
that's
they
so
had their
cool.
babies, they were like meeting up and stuff. So that was really special. And one of the guys that was there was like his love life and really wanting to like manifest or invite in his like dream partner. And so soon after that, he fell in love with this like amazing guy who is awesome. They like bought this insane house in San Diego and are like really living the life that like at that time he was sharing with us that he desired. And like this all happened so quickly after that. And part of it, I think the powerful part, like this was February 2020. Everyone got really clear on, okay, this future state, this life, like we weren't thinking of COVID being a problem at the time. It had started being like, oh, there's a scary virus in China, but it's like we're all able to travel. It's not a big deal. I think when that hit, everyone did have to surrender and trust because
Yeah.
everything was out of our control. And I think that's why specifically that was so powerful for so many of the different people. Some had relationships end or marriages end after that too, because they were like, oh, I didn't see that person in this future snapshot. And maybe that was the first time that they had felt that of, oh, this is something to dive into. But I think through having to surrender so much and trust so much through the pandemic hitting, it was a lot more powerful of an exercise.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think, yeah, with all that, and then the layer on top of the inner peace, it just creates the awareness, and you
Yeah.
can see the snapshot of your future and how it. Because a lot of times I think people forget to dream. You know, they're
Yeah.
they're just numbing life, and
Like it is what it is.
yeah, exactly. I think a perfect now caveat or a perfect transition, since we just talked about dream partner, is to talk about your dream partner. You had mentioned, I think you met him in 2019.
2018.
2018, okay. You did just mention that you still weren't completely open to the level of you are today, because you were still
Yeah.
you're still young in your yoga career. You said 2020, that was before COVID, is when you did the Guatemala one, and that's like the first one you really stepped into that leadership. And I wanna like now rewind time into when you met Ryan at this $3 a night hostel in China. I wanna repeat that, because it's funny, I was like doing research on you and I was at a hostel. I was like, well, like looking around, but it was cool. Hostels are really cool, guys. You guys check out
Hostels
hostels.
are
I'm sure they're even
best.
better in Europe, but the American ones are getting better.
I
wanna-
haven't done many American ones, but they're so great. There's such good ways to meet. I've met people that are like very important people in my life, like my husband, at hostels.
That's so cool. How did that, yeah, let's go how did you guys meet? Like you met in a hostel. What did that conversation look? And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so we met in a hostel. It was in Yangshan, China, which is like, it's in the countryside. It's like a 2-hour drive or so from any nearby airport, and Guilin is the nearby airport. So like it's actually not a very like touristy place in China, but I was on like an extended backpacking trip. I had graduated college early and was like, I'm going to travel. Travel's always been something really important to me, and I actually never left the country until I was 18. So then when I turned 18, I was like, I'm doing all this. And now I've been to like 70 countries or something. That's like, I've traveled quite a bit since I turned 18, but I was going to Tibet. I've always been really drawn to Buddhist culture, not necessarily it as a religion, but I wanted to see the birthplace of it. I'd also gone through Nepal and Bhutan. So that was the general theme of this trip. And I had just done my advanced yoga teacher training, which is a 300-hour program that comes after the 200-hour program, and had started to step more into the role of a teacher there. So I was really going there for learning more about that and connecting with what had always drawn me to these spiritual practices. Ended up being at the hostel. The last morning that I was there, I had one more full day. Decided with my best friend whose name is Morgan as well, so it's confusing. We woke up at 4 a.m. to go on this sunrise hike to see there's like the Lee River that runs through in these like beautiful rock mountains. Like it's really unique to that place. And that's why we went. I saw a picture of a landscape. I'd actually put it on like a vision board the year before and then found where it was, like not knowing where it was. And was like, cool, we're doing that. And there were other like weird examples from that vision board I made of like where I was like staying in the exact, like I looked back after and after my travels, like I had stayed in 2 different places that were on my vision board without realizing, and like the exact same balcony kind of thing. And it was like, there was like weird magic happening during that time of my life. And I met Ryan. So I was 20. Yeah. Yeah. 20, about to turn 21, I guess, at the time. But yeah, so I met Ryan. He was also getting up for the sunrise hike. We showed up. This was like 4:35 in the morning, maybe, at this hike place. And I remember hearing like the noise of a drone and being like, that's so annoying that someone like has a drone here in this like peaceful place. And it was Ryan, like over there with this little drone. So I think I was like,
dang, that seemed like drones weren't that popular either. So you guys both were like a start of the yoga and drone.
He's a very good photographer and videographer and all the things. So like he's very talented, but he was doing a solo backpacking trip and had just gotten into photography. And he was like, I'm going to go travel for 7 months with the money that I have and take pictures along the way and just have a good time like exploring the world. So we were both like on similar kind of like self-exploratory adventures.
You met him because he had the drone going and you're like,
we had shared a car to get there. We had come from Thailand before, me and my friend Morgan. She had gotten food poisoning. It was like not like, it was just like in the middle of our trip. And I had been traveling for 5 or 6 months before that. This was like a 6-week portion that she had joined me for. And this was through a lot of different parts of Asia. So we were battling like some food poisoning from her and just feeling at that point, like I remember China feeling like at that point. And then it very much came to life and we came back to all of it. But we shared a taxi to get there. And I think I was just like eyes closed for the most part, but listening. There were 2 other Irish people that he didn't know well, but he had actually known one of them before. So the 5 of us did that. And then once we got back from the hike, it like was the only day that it had rained really on our entire trip. And it was raining all day. So we were like, oh, should we all just hang around the hostel? It had like a tiny little pool. Let's just go sit in the pool in the rain for the day. Like it's not cold or anything. And just spent time together and we're goofy. And I remember thinking like, he's so interesting. Like I've never met a person that I've connected with so quickly, but it wasn't necessarily in a romantic way. It was in a soul connection kind of way. But we were leaving on a flight at 6 a.m. the next day. I had to leave in the middle of the night. So I remember saying goodnight or goodbye to him the night before and being like, oh, it was so nice to meet you. Maybe we'll be able to meet up for travel again. We're both on these extended trips. I have another month here. And we didn't even really exchange information, I don't think. And then the next day, we had connected via Facebook Messenger. I didn't have Instagram at the time. And where he was essentially asking like where I was flying out. And I could be like not interpreting the story completely correctly, but essentially like I already had my flight home out of Tokyo. That was a month away. I still was going to go through Tibet and stuff before that happened. And he was going to Japan after this portion of China. And he was like, I'll stick around in Japan for an extra couple weeks. And then we can meet up for the day and a half that you're in. I was in Kyoto, or that's when we were going to be in Kyoto. We didn't have very much time in Japan at all, but we were like, cool, we'll meet up. We ended up talking every single day. I got really bad altitude sickness in Tibet. We were just talking through it all. And then by the time we actually met up in Japan, one, it started to develop as a little bit more of a romantic relationship, but more just I was curious. Because I was like, this isn't going to work. Like I had already accepted a job offer to go into consulting. I knew I had to start that in like July. This was like June. And I was like, he's off traveling. This was like his first week of his trip when I met him. He was traveling through December. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. Like I'm starting a new job, whatever, but like I'll stay open-minded about it. Yeah, I certainly was trying to do that. And anyway, by the time we were together in Japan, we were like, this feels very right. We got to spend maybe like 36 hours together. Like it was not very much time before then we had to go to Tokyo and he had to fly out and then we were flying home. But in that time, one, it was on the Kamo River, which is Kamo. So now our dog's name is Kamo, off the river that we always hung out on.
That's cool.
Always, the 36 hours or so that we were there that we hung out on. But yeah, I just remember feeling very connected to him and being like, okay, this is not over. We're going to figure this out. So I flew back home and 3 months later, I was able to go visit him in Vietnam. And it just so happened that like this job in consulting, it's a travel job, like Monday through Thursdays. I was at different client sites all over the US. It was always in the US, but it was Chicago or Minneapolis or New York or whatever. But it worked well because I would have a budget to fly from wherever I was back home or to wherever every like Thursday through Monday. So it took a while. Like, it was long distance between the US and Asia. But by the time he had moved back to Ireland, then it was like much easier for me to fly more regularly to see him or for us to meet up in places. And we were both like shared passion for travel. So it was fun. Like, we met up in all kinds of fun, cool places, even if they were just for 3 days.
Yeah.
And then obviously I've gone to Ireland quite a bit, but like it got to a point where I was going almost every other week or every third week. Like, we were able to see each other quite a bit. And then after a couple of years of that, with a company that I was working with at the time, I was able to negotiate a 6-month leave to go volunteer with a nonprofit, going back to the
Wow.
world peace and all of that. At that time, I like wanted to go into philanthropy and like nonprofit consulting because I was like, that's where I can impact. Since then, I've shifted to be like, really, I can like help people arrive at that inner peace. And that also is going to be a way to help the world. But we moved to South Africa beginning of 2020. And that was like the first place that we could actually live together and have a life together. And went really, we lived there for 6 months together. COVID, like, we couldn't get visa extensions and it was time to go back. So he had to go back to Ireland. I came back here. We decided to get married. And it took a year of being married and not being able to live in the same place, but like meeting up in like Panama
Yeah.
and like different places that the borders were open for us to both travel to. But then after a year, he got the green card and he was able to move here. And everything worked out perfectly because even his company he worked with in Ireland, because like, getting a job was like a little bit of a concern, had just acquired a company in Austin the week he got the green card. That then they were like, oh, you can just go work there. It's easy. Everything worked very well.
Wow. Okay. That was so freaking beautiful. We're not going to have time to
Lots to
down that
unpack.
whole entire thing. But one thing I do want to acknowledge and real quick that you made that was not a part of the story, the purpose of the story, but was in terms of you wanting to do the 6-month leave and philanthropy. And that's like how you can help the world. You made that realization connection. That maybe was a little forceful of like a outside view perspective of how you can make impact. I think protesting is another version of that for some people. Again, I think it always gets back to what are your gifts and lean into those gifts. And that's how you can cure the world. Yeah. I guess the two things I want to ask, one was finding a dream partner on your vision board. And two, I believe you guys started where most couples never experience before they get married is traveling together.
Yeah.
And I think you started at the hardest thing, traveling to different places. You learn a lot about people when you travel, a lot.
Yeah.
When you are not grounded in your safe ecosystem environment, that invites other choices sometimes, or other actions that may not be aligned. I think that's a cool thing that you guys were to start that way. But yeah, was having a dream partner on your vision board?
It wasn't.
It wasn't?
No, it was really at that time in my life, it was a lot about travel. It was a lot about yoga. And it was very much like a period of life. Like, I was graduating college. I was like, had my job situation already set up like pretty far in advance. And I had been deep into self-development work for a long time.
When was the last time you dated before you met Ryan?
There was like a long relationship right before that.
Okay.
I've a serial monogamous. I've always been in
Got it.
not many different relationships, but always in several year relationships.
So I think serial monogamists are just innately looking for their dream partner, right?
Yeah, and I more intentionally, and I'd done that like a few years before too. I was like, I really do want just space. Like, I've always, even though I was always in more serious relationships, I was always very independent and always had my own kind of plan for myself. And actually, like, probably to a fault, it was like, it's my way or the highway kind of thing, like probably pretty inflexible. And meeting Ryan, like, he was the first person that like, I feel like opened my heart in a way that I could actually like trust and feel more of that like soul connection and be more willing, not even to sacrifice or compromise, because it never even felt like that. But like, we were in it together. Like, we were a team from the very start. And I think our dynamic of being long distance, so I'll get to the travel part and stuff as well, it was actually really healthy for us because as somebody who normally just like dove in strong and tried to control outcomes, and it was like looking more long term and like needing answers, it forced us to slow down a little bit. And I also was somebody that's okay, I dive into a relationship and then my friendships would suffer or my relationship with myself would suffer. Like, I'd get so caught up in that. This was really beautiful because I couldn't. I had to focus on myself because even if we were seeing each other every few weeks or every couple months, it was for maybe 3 days. So the beauty of that, like, we both love to travel, and that's like where we feel most liberated and free. And it was never hard to travel together. We just perfect travel companions. Never. We just travel so well together. It's our favorite thing to do. He'll come with me to the Philippines. Like, I drag him on every retreat, which is nice because he's a great photographer. So I get all the photos. But so the travel was never hard for us. What I loved about that is any time we spent together in person was super quality time.
Yeah, so cool.
Like, nothing else mattered. We were not on our phones. And then the first time we spent time together really was in South Africa, which was the complete opposite, also not like normal life. Lockdown happened like 6 weeks after that. And South Africa lockdown was like extremely strict. Like you could not walk outside. It was
Mm.
like, so for 2 months of lockdown when you couldn't even walk outside, and like we had a place right on the beach that was like really nice and like really cheap and like beautiful. You could only step out to go to the grocery store and they would check like receipts and stuff, like
Wow.
very strict and also like scary. Like you didn't want to get caught like breaking the rules there.
Wow.
We had the 400 square foot studio apartment that was tiny. We went from long distance to like, we didn't know anyone else because we had been traveling through like sub-Saharan Africa, some of the other countries when COVID hit, because we had just gotten there. We were like, we got to explore. It was like a whole long story. We got stuck in Zambia. We got stuck in Botswana. We finally made it back to South Africa, like as the country was closing with lockdown. But it was like a hectic week of our rental car was in Botswana. We were stuck in Zambia. We needed to try to get back into Botswana. And then we got stuck in Botswana because South Africa closed its borders and we had a rental car and all of our stuff was in South Africa. It was like a mess. Made it back to South Africa at least. But then we didn't know a single other person at that point. So it was like 2 months of just us.
Wow.
So we got both of those extremes.
Yeah, the two hardest extremes for most people, living together and traveling together.
Yeah. So then when he like moved here in 2021,
It was
we were
so
like,
easy.
this is pretty easy. What wasn't as easy and what was like an unexpected transition was, okay, I have my life, which normally I would leave behind if I'm like traveling, or even in South Africa, it was like everything got put on hold because I'm going to be here for 6 months. And it was like, how do I integrate all of this then with what I'm doing through yoga, what I'm doing with the career that I had at the time? That was like the harder transition, but it was a transition we were both like with each other through. And obviously huge transition for him. Like he went from moving from Ireland where all his family and all his friends are to a brand new place, new job, all the things. But it was a beautiful transition. It was nice.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I have curiosity of diving into that transition, but I want to wrap up with one last thing. But first, I want to acknowledge you, as I acknowledged you at the beginning, of just how you show up. It shines through this whole entire conversation, and you are the epitome of a heart-centered leader.
Thanks. That means a lot.
And what that allows is all this serendipity, or again, however you want to call it, into your life, even at the young age of 20. It's a beautiful thing when you can start seeing these connections happening for you, good or bad, but they are for you. And when you can really be in that place to receive them and not be closed off. I would acknowledge you as someone who is 100% doing that. You are a healer and you are inspiring people. So keep doing you, keep creating more, because as I want to acknowledge to all creators, we need more good creators in the world so it is a war on attention at the end of the day. And then our impact is stunted if we're not allowing, to me, on a greater scale. And that is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And it gives space to the bad to take up that space. But I want to do one last thing. I want you to close your eyes real quick, and we're going to set the scene. And when you open your eyes, I actually want you to look at the camera right in front of you, but not yet. And you're not talking to the camera, you're talking to the world. And I want to imagine a setting where you're going to teach you're the yoga teacher. You're going to teach a yoga class to every single person in the world. And we're going to you are going to set an intention for this class. And it could be around connecting with another soul, your dream partner. It could be connecting with your own soul. But this purpose of this class is for us to all be together as one, to move together, to feel together, to love together, to express together, to be one in this experience, because that is what this life is about. We are all in this together. And I want you to sit with this intention. And when you open your eyes, I want you to express this intention to this biggest freaking class that you've ever seen, because it is the world. And before we do that, let's take a couple the same breaths that we did at the very beginning. Inhale through the nose, expand the rib cage, exhale a little longer, sitting with ourselves, loving what other words come out because they're going to have beauty to them. One more breath. And on the end of that second breath, I'm going to sit back and enjoy this show and let you wrap it up and express this intention whenever you're ready.
The intention that I would wish for everyone is to be present. So presence is your greatest superpower, and there's so much tied into being present, and it's like actually an intention that I share in almost every single class. But how can you be present in your body, in your life, and who you are, allowing yourself to feel fully alive in your body, in your life, with yourself? How do you fully accept the present moment without resisting it, without fighting it, without trying to change or control it? but rather how can you allow it, radically accept it, and know that you're exactly where you're meant to be? Because when we reflect on all of these things that happen in the universe, with God, with higher powers, nothing is ever a mistake. Everything has led us to this very moment. So there's nothing outside of you that you need to be complete. You're already here. You've already arrived, and our very nature is one of being whole and complete and perfect in our very essence. So presence would be my overarching intention.
All right, y'all. That is all we have for this episode with Miss Morgan Moulckers. If you're in Austin, I highly recommend taking one of her classes. I haven't even taken one of your classes. I just realized that. Okay, well, check. I am going to do this very soon. Maybe before I leave for. Oh no, you're going to the Philippines.